to know that unfalsifiability, as Karl Popper explained it, is the test not of the strength of the theory, but of its weakness. If it can't be rebutted, then it means that it's an assertion that has very little value. It either explains everything or nothing, very much more likely to explain the second. William Ewart Gladstone, great British Liberal Prime Minister and Christian theologian, spent a great deal of his life trying to show that the wonderful speculations on morality and ethics and society of the philosophers of 5th century Athens were just, they didn't know this, but they were preparing the way for the arrival of Jesus of Nazareth. They were just prefigurations of the greater wisdom that was to come. He had to argue this. He laid his life on it, because if it were otherwise, it wouldn't be true that without divine revelation, we wouldn't have morals. Here I'm getting a bit nearer to the center of this argument. There are those who say, and I believe they attack us in our very deepest integrity, in our very core, who say that we wouldn't know the difference, wouldn't be able to know the difference, wouldn't be equipped to understand the difference between a right and a wrong action if there wasn't a supernatural warrant for this, if it hadn't been revealed to us in one or other set of books that such is the case. Now, I believe this argument to be self-evidently false. I don't have the time to demonstrate it in full. I'll take any challenge on it, but I do have a question that is my own challenge. You have to name for me an ethical action taken or a moral statement made by a person of faith that I could not make. And I've now put this question to some senior rabbis, to a number of Christian priests and Muslim imams and others. And I've not so far been given an instance where that would be defensible, where they could say, here's a moral thing we know about that you don't. Here's an ethical action we can perform, an unbeliever cannot. I leave the question with you. I'm always open to an answer to this challenge. It has a corollary question, which is a lot easier. Can any of you think of a wicked thing done by a person of faith because of their faith? You've already thought of one. You've already thought of another one. In the course of the evening, you'll think of several more. Actions of wickedness, iniquity, that are performed because people believe God wants them done, or because the person performing them believes he's doing God's work. This is a form of crime and evil unknown to the unbeliever. And I think if it doesn't make a case for the moral superiority of atheism, it certainly makes the case against the moral superiority of faith. Very well. There's a second, and even more, I think, overpowering disadvantage self-imposed on the religious, because they can't very far depart. Rabbi Wolpe gets very daring with this. If you ask him what he really thinks about the texts that tell him what God wants, he will not say that they're to be taken strictly literally. He will, for example, say that the Jewish prayer, I imagine he will say, I've actually never asked him directly, but the prayer with which Jewish men are supposed to begin every day, that thanks God, just to begin with, thanks them for not making them a woman and not making them a goy or Gentile. He says, well, that's not really, no, it isn't. Of course it's not. It's not a moral thing to say. It's a stupid thing to say, and it's also a nasty thing to say. So most Jews don't say it anymore. So if you follow me closely here, comes to save us from the wickedness that comes from the texts. And what that means to me, and what I will continue arguing throughout the evening in different ways, is this, it's a very simple proposition. Man did not make God in his own image, as is said in the Bible. To the contrary, men and women made many gods in their own images, and it shows. After all, it's just as difficult for me to disprove that there are 1,000 gods as that there is one. And every believer you know has gods he doesn't believe in. The rabbi doesn't believe in Allah. You don't believe in Zeus. Muslims don't believe that Jesus of Nazareth was the Son of God. All of them think, oh, that's absolute nonsense, but that their own belief is the valid one. Now again, I put it to you, either all these beliefs are equally true, which seems impossible, or only one of them is true, which admittedly is a possibility, or they are all false, and I am not the atheist you think I am. Everyone in the room is an atheist because they have a God in which they don't believe. Rabbi Walt has a God in which he doesn't believe. I just say, I'll go you one better. I don't think there are any gods at all. It's not that hard of a leap to make, you know. There's a wonderful novel by Peter de Vries called Slouching to Kalamazoo. Well, a novelist you all ought to read if you haven't. He was brought up as a Dutch Reformed Calvinist. In this novel, there's a debate between the town atheist and the town priest, and they both succeed in convincing each other completely in the course of the evening. This never really happens. So much so that neither of them can be persuaded to go back to their previous position. But at any rate, de Vries at one point says, musing on this, his leading character says, people used to believe there were many gods, they were polytheists. Then they believed there were spirit gods, gods in the trees, gods in the waterfalls, gods in the wind, and so forth. And then they became more polytheistic, and then they became monotheistic, with only one god. So they're getting nearer to the true figure all the time. Who says there's no progress? The magic figure of zero, the discovery of which was a great innovation in human history, is the one at which we will arrive when we contemplate the likelihood that we are supernaturally designed with a plan in mind for us. Now let's just consider for a moment, what if I was to announce that I was a convert to that view? What if I say, okay, I give up. I've listened to the wise men now, I think it's true. I think that God intervened and that I'm saved as a result, and that I wouldn't know right from wrong, and so I'm grateful for this intervention. Well, I'd have to believe the following. The human species we now know to be at the very least 100,000 years old. Certainly not less. Some good scientists say near a quarter of a million. I'll take 100,000. For the beliefs of Jews, Muslims, and Christians at any rate to have any validity, it must be the case that the Creator watched this species for 97,000 years as it was born, usually dying in childbirth, lived perhaps to the age of 20 or 25, dying in terror of nameless diseases or of their teeth, terrified by earthquakes they couldn't explain, by typhoons, by hurricanes, tortured by plagues that they couldn't understand. They didn't know there were microorganisms who have dominion over us. We don't have dominion over nature, it's the other way around. Violent in war, slavery, racism, you name it. For 97,000 years, heaven watches with indifference. And then says, 3,000 years ago, starting 3,000 years, it's probably time to intervene now. Not in China, where they can already read and know how to make things and have a concept of science and knowledge and philosophy. No, only in the most remote, backward, savage, and superstitious parts of the Middle East. And that's how you'll know your redemption. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't believe any of you in this room can be persuaded by any artifice of rhetoric or sophistry to believe in anything so wicked as well as anything so stupid as that. If it were true, it would be hateful. Those who allege it to be true are not necessarily hateful, but they ask you to ignore all the painstaking evidence that's been piled up by the real work of humanity, which is that of philosophy, science, and culture, in which the next step each society and each individual has to take is the emancipation of themselves from theocracy and its poisons. And I invite you to join me in that enterprise, and I'm very grateful for your attention. Thank you.